Alright, if you're watching this video, it's because you've been instructed to improve your outline for a paragraph. I'm just going to start you off and I'm going to walk you through the steps that I would take as I were to outline a paragraph, explaining each step as I go. So the first thing that you're going to start off is with the directions. In the directions, what you're typically going to get is use the box below to outline a paragraph that answers the question, and then it'll be followed by a question. In this case, the question we're trying to answer is, what is the central conflict of Wiffle Ball? Wiffle Ball is a short story that you read, and then conflict is the term that we learned in class that is like the main problem of the story. Alright, when you start there, when you outline a paragraph, you're going to start with your subclaim, which is a one sentence that somebody could disagree with. But because that person can disagree with it, you got to follow that with evidence. And the point of evidence is to prove whatever you just said. When we talk about English class, that's almost always going to turn out to be a quote. And then last but not least, the last thing you're going to do is work on your reasoning. The reasoning piece is where you explain how your evidence proves your subclaim. Alright? So if we're working on what is the central conflict of Wiffle Ball, and you're at your subclaim, you got to start off. This needs to be a complete sentence, even in your outline. But the easy part is you can just turn the question around. So the central conflict of Wiffle Ball is, and then whatever you think the central conflict is, you write there. And then the best answers are going to follow that with because, and then you're going to give a reason as to why this is the central conflict. And that reason why should be based off of what the definition of a conflict is. Okay. After that, when you get to your evidence, this evidence needs to be a quote from the story or two quotes from the story. Typically what I'm going to tell you to do is this quote should be 3 to 5 sentences long, or 2 sets of 2 to 3 sentence quotes. The reason I'm telling you to do this, if you go shorter than 3 sentences, you're typically not going to give me enough information to prove anything. But if you go over 5 sentences, you're going to be giving so much information that I'll get lost in what you're trying to prove, and I'll just have too much that I'm trying to pay attention to. Okay, but now that you've told me what you're trying to prove in your paragraph, and you've given me the evidence to prove it, what you have left is this reasoning box, which is where you're going to explain how your evidence proves your claim. For now, as we're doing this, I'm going to give you these sentence stems. But what these sentence stems are intended to do is they start you off with a sentence, and then you finish it. The idea behind this is, like, at the beginning of the year, I can kind of tell you, like, well, you should probably start this way. But as the year goes on, I'm going to take these things away. So what you want to be doing is practicing how to fill this out on your own. But I'm telling you, if I'm asking you about what the conflict of a story is, you're going to start me off just by defining the conflict. You should use the dictionary definition, but to save time, the definition of a conflict is the central problem in a story. Okay. But then you see these words and. These are transition words so that you can transition from one sentence to the next. But with the word and, you know I'm going to say something that is similar. Which makes sense because the next one is, and a character's motivation is defined as. And now we have 2 definitions we're starting off with. A character's motivation is defined as the reason a character does something. Alright. The reason you're starting off just by giving 2 definitions is so that you and the reader know what you are trying to prove. Because if you think a conflict is one thing, but your reader thinks a conflict is a different thing, they're going to be confused when you try to explain things. But now that you've established what a conflict is, now you're going to start speaking specifically about the quote that you picked out and the thing you're trying to prove. So you get the transition of so, but so when the author states, and if you ever see this, the author states, that will always be followed by a quote. Alright? Because what an author states is you can't summarize this, you can't make it up, it has to be words that come from whoever the author is. I'm telling you though, the trick here is the reason you start off with 3 to 5 sentences in the big evidence piece is so that when you say the author states, you can come up here and choose 1 sentence or less from this big quote. Because the idea is, if you give me just one sentence, you're saying, this is exactly where I need you to focus right now. This sentence is the one I'm talking about. Because you're going to say, when the author states, it indicates, which is really just a fancy way of saying shows. So it shows us that the character's motivation is. And now all of a sudden, the definition of a motivation becomes helpful, because you're going to say specifically that a character does something because. Right? So the character's motivation is, and then I'm not saying it because it will give you the answer. But now you said what the motivation is. You say, however, which is the opposite of and. So if you see the word however, you know whatever's going to follow is the opposite of what was just said. So the character's motivation is, however, this motivation is hard to achieve because. And then you got to give me a reason it's hard to achieve. But if you're trying to talk about a conflict, which is the central problem of a story, a motivation is what a character wants. And if they can't have what they want, that's going to give you a conflict, right? So now that you said, well, this is what they want, but they can't have it because, and you get to your therefore box, right? And this therefore, all therefore means is for these reasons. But what you're saying is everything I just said in my reasoning box shows that the central conflict of the story is, but this should look a whole lot like your sentence up here. Right? Because if you've explained what the conflict is, that's what you were trying to prove. So in your ending, you're really just trying to restate that. Therefore, the central conflict of the story is blank because blank. But your because is actually going to come from right here. All right. Now that you've walked through this, I expect you to go into your own outline, and with your own outline, improve it based off of the feedback you just got here.